Hello, and welcome to another fully live Friday episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Kody Kinzie. I am a security researcher at Varonis, and today we have my good friend, coworker, and fellow hacker Killian here to go over the hacking news. Killian, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me again. How are you doing?
Pretty tired. We just did a Wi-Fi hacking self-defense class at the Missoula Public Library, not yesterday, but the day before. And it was a big hit. We had like 20 people there. I kind of did a bad job of telling everyone about the stream. So if anybody from that class actually is making it to the stream, then hello, and thank you for making that a really super fun event. It was great. So I got to talk to some cool people from the college. I got to talk to some people who were from the community, and I really had to think about if I only had a little bit of time to tell people what to do for Wi-Fi self-defense, like what would I tell them? So Killing, you want to know what I would suggest?
Yeah, I do. This is good information.
All right. So of the really sneaky things I demonstrated, the number one that people seemed really surprised by was how much information I could pull out of their phones just by creating fake Wi-Fi networks and having them, just can hoard Wi-Fi networks as they go through the world and save them. Most people, when they join a Wi-Fi network, they just think it's like the automatic function of the phone and they don't need to manage that at all. And oh, what a simple world you live in. I wish that were the case. But in fact, it means that everywhere you go, you're basically giving that network permission to manage your phone's data. That's a lot more than most people think they're doing. They're like, oh, I'm gonna get something from the network. I'm gonna get its data. But no, at that point, that particular network name and password allows any Wi-Fi network with the intention of connecting to your phone to basically just do it without your permission or without you really knowing. So what I mean is, if you join Google Starbucks, you go into a Starbucks, you sit down, you join the Wi-Fi, and then you go to a concert and you have your Wi-Fi on, or it's just on because you forgot about it. If I create a network called Google Starbucks, your phone is going to connect to it. And if I'm someone who wants to send you phishing stuff or like maybe a malicious download or something, that makes it really easy for me to do that. And it also makes me able to tell where you've been in the past. And some people were really uncomfortable with knowing that maybe every single place they'd been that they connected to Wi-Fi, someone could find out forensically for a fact if they'd actually been there. So deleting those unused Wi-Fi networks seems like a chore, but it's one of those things where when you open up that list in your phone or on your computer of how many are actually stored in there, you're like, when was I at the Grand Canyon? Like what? Like what? So yeah, if you are just getting started with wanting to keep yourself safe from Wi-Fi attacks, I would say the number one thing that a lot of people don't talk about and I love to demonstrate is how many networks we have stored in our phones and how many of those are open networks that reveal a lot more about you than you might think. And we were able to have someone connect to our little fake network in class and then start basically having their device look for updates for all the applications and software running on their phones. And we could see those queries going out and be like, oh, now I know all the different stuff that's running on your phone or the applications you have open right now. So it was really surprising to some people how much information was being leaked in real time from their devices, available for really anyone to see. So yeah, stop connecting to random Wi-Fi networks and storing them in your phone forever. And then don't connect to networks via a scanned QR code. If I was going to trick someone into doing some sketchy Wi-Fi stuff, scanned QR codes really don't give you a lot of information. And until recently, at least on the iPhone, you couldn't actually delete a network that you scanned in from a QR code unless you were in range of it. So the list wasn't even accessible to you. So that's concerning because it means someone could inject a malicious Wi-Fi network into your phone and then take control of your network connection whenever they wanted to, or even potentially track you from you having scanned that QR code by your phone just continuously calling out for that network. So a lot of cool and surprising attacks. We'll probably maybe do some demos of those in future conferences because people seemed really interested in how they could keep themselves a little bit safer and quite shocked by some of the demonstrations.
Yeah, that's.
I was going to say also, if you want to see it, I put up a stream of it. So
nice.
You can't see the slides of it. I'll have to put those up a little bit later, but we did stream this live for anybody who wanted to kind of listen in and wasn't available. So you can check that out on the Redia channel. This is just available. So it is a public class, so they let us stream it live while we were doing it. And because my crack team was in charge, the first 3 minutes have no audio. So enjoy that. Sorry, Kelly, what were you saying?
No, I was just going to say that's a really good point to communicate with people because and I'm sure you've had this conversation too, where you talk to people, oh, well, no, my data is protected because, the Wi-Fi is encrypted. Well, yes, asterisk, if you control the Wi-Fi device you're connecting to, that ceases to be the case unless you're running a VPN over it. And that's the thing that it takes a while to wrap people's heads around, is if you control the endpoint or the, the terminus point of that encryption, not really encrypted anymore. Again, unless you're doing end-to-end like Wi-Fi, or I'm sorry, like a VPN over Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and actually what you're saying is particularly relevant to one of our news stories today, because a lot of the attacks that I was talking about in this class, people were like, wow, where did you learn this? And I was like, and I told them about this one researcher, Matthew Van Hoff, whose papers I read all the time and who is always in the news for finding devious attacks against Wi-Fi. And while I was reading through our news articles today, Killian, guess whose name I saw? Matthew Van Hoff, per usual. So I have like two friends in the hacker community that are like always in the news, Matthew Van Hoff and Patrick Wardle. So if you want to find out about a cool security vulnerability or something like a day or two before, like the mainstream news is like warning everyone about it, just follow them. And they talk about it in conferences sometimes weeks or months before it ends up being a big story. So yeah, a lot of these attacks are really, really interesting and really cool and very low level. And that's why they get so much attention, because billions of devices run Wi-Fi, Can't say that about many other types of technology. All right, so we have a lot of news today, and I actually wanted to start with the one that you sent me, Killian, or one of the ones you sent me. Elon Musk and other tech leaders call for a pause on training more sophisticated AI than I think they were saying like ChatGPT-4. They kind of set a limit on it.
Yeah.
Now, I immediately have to play devil's advocate here,
Sure.
and mention that Elon Musk seems particularly upset that nonprofit that he helped found is now a mega business that is competing against, in some ways, like his properties. So I would just say it's worth noting the stakes that the billionaires in these sorts of letters do have in their opinions towards maybe competing enterprises, and maybe like wanting to give themselves, I don't know, a little bit of time to catch up, maybe in terms of things that they're offering, seeing as this one thing that they helped found seems to be better positioned than like most businesses, and is winning like billions of dollars of investment from Microsoft. Okay, with that being said, as a context, this is an interesting letter. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this was an interesting one, and you know what? For as much as you maybe wouldn't think, I kind of tend to agree that we probably need to think through this a little bit more before we sort of turn this loose on the world. I can see the application, the value of it, but think about the problems that we have with these trained AI models. Like, historically speaking, if you don't really consider the data that you're feeding them, you can build in a number of biases in the system that were not intentional. Some of the other stuff, like we talked about last stream, where if you phrase the question differently, you can get it to do things that it probably shouldn't do. So there's a little bit of maybe guardrail research that we need to do around it. And with the speed that they're moving, I mean, how long did it take between ChatGPT 3 and 4 to come out? I don't know how long, but it felt like it was,
fast.
Weeks.
It's
months.
hard to keep up
with. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And the change or the improvement between those two of them it seemed at least pretty massive. So we probably need to take a second to think about this a little bit. And that's without getting into the doomsday prophecy stuff that we're going to automate ourselves out of jobs and things like that, which I do think to some extent, it could be possible. Certain jobs we certainly could automate out of existence, but I think there's larger ethical implications to it if we're not careful about the data we train it on, is my concern, especially about biases.
I have a much more radical opinion. Yeah, so like I think that we are witnessing a fundamental shift to this being the way that computers are broken. I think that we are going to start seeing like systems that can be confused or caused to hallucinate in ways that are exploitable, the same way that we see like a vulnerability in a computer system that causes a crash. So if you can cause an AI system to hallucinate or lose its grip on reality or what its bearings are, you can start to get it to do stuff it's not supposed to be. And I honestly think like the next however like decades of computing and us as hackers learning to defeat these cheap AI models that are
Mm-hmm.
specifically trained on specific tasks is literally going to be figuring out how to dazzle and confuse their dumb
Right.
little computer brains with paradoxes or poems or all
Mm-hmm.
these other weird things that are going to like break something in its training that we're going to have to retrain and retrain and retrain. But those are going to be the exploits where nowadays, instead of looking at the software version, you're going to look at the AI version and be like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this one hates the color blue. And you're going to have a blue
Right.
LED in your backpack, rig it up and wave it in front, and it's going to let you in the building or something like that.
Right.
And it's just a matter of finding these quirks or edge cases in these AIs at scale. And, you know, now you have to like make an AI called like Tickler or something that goes in and like,
Right.
you know, tries to figure out what makes the AI start hallucinating. And now you have an exploit machine. And maybe that's the new Metasploit. Like it's
Right.
really, I think that some of these flaws built into AI are here to stay. Like, and there's only going to be little ways of trying to patch it up in order to kind of fix these at the biggest scale. But I think that what they're kind of not emphasizing in this complaint is like, yeah, okay, there are going to be some jobs that go away, and some of these jobs take very little energy or effort, and that's why, you know, people that stay in these jobs and get really, really good at doing them fast, they're good jobs. They're things that can kind of be passed on because they're skills that are very useful and have been for some time. And what's being threatened is those very skills themselves. They are no
Right.
longer confined to human brains, and we're starting to see. I feel like I have basically a high schooler with a caffeine addiction and like 15 to 20 minutes of their time per query to do stuff. And that's about as much brain power as this can muster. And it's like, it lacks experience, world experience. So it has to take things it sees literally. It cannot interpret or rely on the kind of experience that I rely on, having been kicked around in life and having experienced the limits. So I think some of the things they're talking about, like AI weapons, AI defenses, like some of the things that are going to be like weaponized, those are truly scary to me because now we're not talking about like quirks and whatever else. Now we're talking about like lethal systems that are designed to act more quickly than a human can. But in our news today, there is an announcement by Microsoft that they are having a security co-pilot. So that means like if you've ever seen in like Ghost in the Shell, they have a bunch of like brains that are all like focusing on the network and whatever, and then someone's like, shut it down, do this, what's the analysis? And it looks very like stupid and whatever, but the brains are able to continue doing their automated stuff and then report back intelligible stuff that lets a human make a decision that's way faster and way more informed. And it was sci-fi, but it looks like that's what Microsoft is trying to kind of allude to with this announcement that, hey, we're going to have a bunch of like, you know, AI automated stuff, and you as a security person can ask it questions and give it commands with a chat GPT like interface and have it know what that means and maybe shut down these ports or whatever else faster than someone pounding into an Nmap script or whatever it is capable of doing.
That's my dream goal for like the security world, is exactly that, to be able to react faster, to take all of this data, you know, parse it, process it, make it, you know, easily readable and understandable, and then take action again without having to go, because I mean you've probably done it, I know I've done it, like, you know, typing into like the Cisco, you know, iOS back when that was their trying to close the ports and use their specific command language and everything like that. Again, shows how old I am doing network stuff. But exactly that. If you can say, hey machine, like shut down port blah blah blah, you know, or you know, send it to null or whatever it is, like, and it could just do that for you without having to learn the commands for it. Like, that's interesting and important, and allows us to react much faster. But yeah, taking people out of the equation is what makes me nervous, making some of these decisions. And that's been my kind of feeling since forever, you know, with autonomous cars and everything else. Like,
yeah, it's really hard to know like what the line is here also. Here's a big thing that they're saying is, should we automate all the jobs, including the fulfilling ones? Is writing copy fulfilling? That's a question. Some people really like it. And the problem here is like writing copy is no longer hard. Like I wrote a perfectly good email and then thought it was pretty good, showed it to people, they were like, this is pretty good. And then I had, just for fun, ChatGPT for rewrite it with a specific couple goals in mind. Clarity, conciseness, and like making sure that everything was easy to read. And it came back, was like, this is better. You know, this is better than what I wrote. And I really tried pretty hard on it. But of course, like, you know, it was only as good as what went in, and like the tool like kind of shaped it up according to the specifics. But like the fundamental result was better than I could have done with like, you know, a team of 2 other people kind of coaching me through it. So that's really the thing here, is like it increases the quality that a layperson who knows how to use the tool can do. And that in some cases does feel like it's cheapening some of these jobs. But as has always been the question with automation, like, is this really a super useful, use of human time? Like, getting the point across in a business email is no longer something that requires a lot of experience. You can shout. I was making a joke that, like, I got a business email recently and I ran it through ChatGPT detector, and 40% of the business email was made by ChatGPT 4. And I was like, this is the future of business negotiation. Two people shouting their raw desires into an AI and having it, make it all padded and whatever and sound like, neutral, and like removing all the snarking and whatever and making it just neutral as milk. So these two AIs are just kind of communicating, and then both people are just getting the raw points back. Very strange to be using AI as a translator to be able to like get other people to understand the point, but it is kind of making that sort of information exchange more universal on one level. So it's a very, very strange time to be like talking to someone who's not using their human voice and is like basically like filtering what they're saying through an AI.
Wow, the way that you phrase that, just like, that's the most dystopian vision that I can possibly think of. We're not able to connect as people anymore, as like human being entities. Like, we have to let machines do that for us. That makes me super sad.
What I would pay for, and I was joking on Twitter about this, is I would pay for a filter that automatically scans my incoming messages and whatever, and anybody that sends me something that's more than 70% ChatGPT generated, they just get it automatically bounced back in shame. And they're just like, listen, like, you must use your human voice to talk to me, or I'm not going to read this. Like, I don't have time to read something that no one else on earth has read. That's what I think is like the most dystopian part of all of this, and why maybe it should be paused. Can you imagine getting like spam email commercials that nobody in the entire world but you has to suffer through, that literally no one else has seen because it's specifically just generated for you, and it sucks so much and nobody else had to suffer with it through you? That just doesn't seem fair.
It kind of changes like the kind of balance of power, or like the trade economy. If somebody's going to take time to come up with something to ask you for whatever it is to communicate with you, and they have nothing invested in it, no skin in the game, like, how much is it really worth then? I guess it's physically taking time from you. Really,
I know this is a joke. David Johnson, my psychology degree may finally become useful, but seriously, knowing how to like bully, manipulate, gaslight, or otherwise like cause ChatGPT to like go off the rails is actually like a skill that I think will not involve as much computer science as knowledge of how the models perceive the world and how to affect it. So those dust off those philosophy degrees and whatever else, because you might be able to like get a computer to lapse into nihilism and just let you in because it doesn't care anymore.
We say that as a joke, but you know what? 2 years from now, we're going to be like, our AI's depressed.
It can't find the point anymore. Yeah. Because maybe it's trained on a bunch of stuff that makes it feel like that's an appropriate response, So another comment from James is, what if the AI goes on strike? That's not a joke anymore, because some people are building products that rely on these models, and they're centralized. They're not democratized. And we saw the invention a couple weeks ago of a new protocol built on top of Bitcoin specifically for leaking large language models and enabling like more punk researchers, like certain people, to download it and then like continue to like iterate and learn on both the Llama and Alpaca models, which were officially taken down and like subject to DCMA like takedown requests. So these centralized AI models, if OpenAI has a little hiccup like they did a couple weeks ago, where there was a flaw in an open source library that caused them to have to take it down, that means that you might have to go back to doing things the old-fashioned way. And if you're not still good at that and you've been relying on this, you're gonna look really bad. You're gonna get embarrassed. So I found myself relying on it to generate large lists of options and then just picking the best one, and having to generate those lists of options myself is a pain. I hate it. I forgot how much I hated it until ChatGPT went down and I had to make a list of 25 ideas. It sucked. I hated it.
This is a good comment. Why shouldn't the AI be nihilistic like the rest of us? Fair point. I mean, there's a reason why Marvin the Paranoid Android, there's a reference for some people out there, is a personal hero of mine. Also voiced by Alan Rickman in the movie, so it's like a double win.
Yeah, so the last comment I'll make on this article before we go through the rest of the security news is they've said the word controversial so many times in this article to like not to just like make this technology seem like it has like a lot of naysayers like just out of the just like just tell us why. Don't say the word controversial twice in a row, Brian or Ryan. But anyway, that's my only is like this is technology that most people don't understand how it works. Obviously these tech billionaires are going to have the implicit want to catch up, but as we said, there is some concerns here with like if I'm already getting business emails that are like primarily generated by ChatGPT. I went online and I was like soliciting for someone to do some work for me, and I noticed most of the pitches I were getting were like very long and specific, and they were ChatGPT generated because why not? So this is really the future of having our time wasted, and I really wish they would have spent more time talking about that. Aside from just like how, you know, it's probably going to impact their bottom line of their companies, but you know, what are you going to do? All right. So this is an interesting story. Killing, did you send me this one?
Yeah, I did.
Yes. Yeah. So this kind of ties nicely into the one that I sent you about a giant data leak from a company that is working for the Russian government. So switching over to the United States, it seems like the FBI has been buying bulk internet data from a Florida company that also has some pretty deep ties to the Tor network. So when I say deep ties, I mean they were donating hardware. So like you would think that like the Tor network could be like, hey, what is that you do again? Like, what is it that your job is? Oh, wait, you sell like traffic flow analysis data to the FBI. That's okay. Like your donations are appreciated, but like I think that perhaps we'll just go ahead and not do that. Yeah. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that was the most shocking part of it is the fact that not only were they donating like hardware and other things, I believe later in the article it does say that there was also entries in like the Tor DNS, I guess, that was going through some of their nodes at least. So they were grabbing some of this data. It kind of defeats the entire purpose, to be anonymous. So I guess what this tells me is even if you use Tor, run a VPN.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's a pretty well-known secret that like private businesses are contracted to work with like the government to do these sorts of things, and that also like when we tell people like, hey, your telecommunication company is selling your stuff, blah blah blah, like we're not kidding. Like we're not being paranoid when we say that like when I personally use a VPN, it's mostly just to like deny value to the company that is also selling the internet from basically making money off of me twice, you know? Because what they'll do is turn around and sell the information, and the FBI can very nicely use it to complete the dots between using a VPN and using something else, you know? So if your internet service provider knows your VPN IP address and then it knows your real IP address, that's not like that's traffic flow, we call it, or web flow information that allows like metadata analysis at scale, which can trip you up, as I believe happened to Palm, which we're going to get into later on the breach forums. So yeah, this is something that is obviously a problem for anybody who's trying to be anonymous on the internet, because these sorts of businesses, I mean, they'll work with governments, but they also provide this to private companies. And we've seen examples of like very expensive tools that allow you to do some very stocky stuff just by knowing a small piece of information about someone. So yeah, that's really the big like thing here is we know that these companies exist. It's just that its relationship with the Tor browser is concerning. Like nobody understood why they were resolving to infrastructure that belongs to like a Florida company with a reputation for selling to law enforcement. It seems like the opposite. It seems like basically like if Tor were taken over, that's what you would see. So some people started talking about it last year as to like why this was happening or why there would be any sort of network connection here. And that kind of eventually led them to say that they didn't want to run on the donated equipment anymore. So yeah, take it as you will. I think that nothing is perfect, and Tor is not a one-stop solution. Like obviously, there are a lot of parties interested in trying to look at Tor NetFlow data, and the more that you are able to analyze, the more you're able to de-anonymize people. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Everything in the story makes sense to me. I look with modern capitalism and ties to the government and big data and data leaks. Like this all is 100% makes sense to me, and I'm not surprised by anything. If you're shocked by something, let me know in the comments. Someone Jacob says, anyone seen Snowden in a while? Yeah, I think he had a kid. I think I saw it on Twitter. That's all I have for that. All right, so let's talk about your privacy. No, we're going to talk about the Russian version of this. How can we take that story that we just took about the United States and make it seem much scarier? Well, we could associate it with some really well-known APTs, and then we can also talk about disinformation and censorship. So while the US government is implicated here in potentially maybe buying some data to complete some investigations, do some spying, you know, pretty light espionage kind of stuff, just a little bit of mass surveillance on the open market. Russia's aims are a little bit more active. This is more towards de-anonymizing users to suppress people who might be protesting or get wind of protests before they start, and also be able to push massive amounts of propaganda through puppet accounts. So this is a company, I believe they're called Volcano, but in obviously Russian. And they look like a cybersecurity consultancy, but they're actually part of a network of a handful, well, maybe like a dozen or so private contractors that are directly working with the Russian military in order to provide basically firepower and support for cyber campaigns. So this is my submission for most confusing graph of the week. It is not only in Cyrillic, it is also okay. There we go. So this is a system codenamed Scan, developed since 2018, that explains how they do some sort of nefarious thing. There you go. I've got one other submission for most confusing chart of the week, so just remember that one, and you'll have to pick which one. So this kind of goes through how they have links to Sandworm, which the U.S. government said caused blackouts in Ukraine, and did NotPetya, which started in Ukraine and then spread all over the world. So ScanV is basically evil Shodan. That, if I had to describe it, it basically continuously scans the internet for vulnerabilities and then stores them. And not only stores them, it does some like invasive network scanning and really like gets into the details and stores like basically the equivalent of an attack plan on file that anybody in the Russian government can use. So let's say I'm a Russian GRU agent and I want to break into I don't know, a dam. It doesn't matter which dam, or maybe a specific one. I can look through the files and see if we've already identified a vulnerability, attack path, and basically like network infrastructure in that particular dam or a nearby one or whatever, according to my search parameters. So it makes planning an operation as easy as identifying the target and then checking to see what's the most severe vulnerability for that target on file. Evil Shodan. It's pretty. I mean, come on, evil Shodan. It's not a hard concept. Just take Shodan and make it evil. Come on, like. All right. So the next one is Asmit. So this is a blueprint for surveilling and controlling the internet. It basically allows you to like intercept everything that's going on, but it relies like on physical access to the carriers to get this data. So that one is not as interesting because we kind of expected that. But we've also got a couple that do just disinformation. Where are we on that? Yes, conflict. So, okay, so this is like, nobody likes to see this. So they also provide cyber training for mass like destruction and chaos. So this is a training program that basically takes GRU agents and teaches them how to take out like critical infrastructure targets, and also identifies critical infrastructure targets and also mocks them up and lets them attack them in like a kind of cyber range style. So training cyber people on how to take down a country's infrastructure is pretty much as offensive as it gets. Like you're planning for a war basically, or something that it would be such an exchange as to cripple another country. So that's a pretty heavy hitter when it comes to like one of these private contractors. Like they're not just training people on how to secure their networks or like just making evil Shodan. They're like actually training cyber agents for large scale attacks, which would have like a massive impact. So obviously we are not a huge fan of this company, or I guess this guy who made it, as they have a giant map of where we live with big targets on it. Stop. Now, okay, that being said, I can virtually guarantee you that there's some like, government contractor in the United States that does virtually the same thing. It's just like evil Shodan's a good idea, and like having people that know how to hit these sensitive targets in response to somebody else hitting these sensitive targets is almost definitely something that other countries would be interested in. So while this is obviously like shocking to people who don't know how the game is played, like I think that this is actually kind of standard for countries with offensive cyber programs that engage private contractors. So like obviously having the lid ripped back on this and seeing how they've been involved in all this stuff, especially some of the like puppeting stuff where they just have tons of sock puppets that are like
Right.
constantly being developed and really like done over a very large period of time. Like the overwhelming feeling on the Russian internet is being made to feel like there's so many of these authentic accounts like parroting the stuff that other people feel drowned out.
Right.
And it has a pretty dramatic effect. It seems to be like a very powerful program.
Yeah. This is really the kind of the definition of saying the quiet part out loud. We all know that this is what happens and how it works, but it's interesting to get a view of it as like a civilian, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of these attacks are targeted against you as civilians.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
it's disinformation that floods your feeds with artificial, like talking pieces. It's things that are designed to make it difficult for somebody in the population to understand what the real sentiment is or communicate with anybody in a secure or private manner. That's fundamentally what they're for. Pretty sketchy.
This really is like kind of, if we wanted to make a a straw man or an effigy for the dark side of social media and everything else, like this is kind of it. Like this is the playbook to take something that that in the 90s was kind of the city on the hill. You know what I mean? Like we're all going to communicate, we're going to be share information. Well, this is the dark side of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is obviously, it's pretty shocking to see like how advanced this kind of sort of thing is getting and how much resources are like put into these offensive cyber programs. There are a lot of people that are working for these, and some people actually reached out and kind of talked to the Guardian about what their experiences were and why they ended up leaving. And like being part of active cyber campaigns, having like all of your work siloed so you don't know what other people are working on. Some of it, could be really bad, it turns out. And a lot of these people, it seems like they just thought they were working for a regular cybersecurity firm and didn't know really how deep they were going with the GRU. So pretty spooky.
Yeah.
It just, especially that like a lot of them just kind of didn't know towards the end. All right, so this is some serious gaslighting by the NCA, National Crime Agency of UK. They went ahead and created a bunch of distributed denial of service websites, advertising services for a pretty good amount of time. And then after luring everybody into a false sense of security, they hit them up with, where is it? This hilarious full page. There we go. Look at this graphic. Alert! This site was created and controlled by the police the whole time. We will be in touch with you shortly. Operation Power Off. This is so funny. So the whole thing here is like they're saying that they have like dozens of these websites and everyone you visit is actually controlled by the police. They only chose to unmask one and then let everyone know that this whole operation is like ongoing and that they're like still doing it. So they're not like, the operation's over, you're all safe. They're like, hey, this operation's ongoing. We're about to call you. P.S. All these other websites are fake too. Good luck figuring it out. Bye.
I love that. I love that. That's the finest in psychological warfare.
It's pretty crazy. The fundamental problem with these marketplaces is you don't know who runs them.
Yeah.
And you can't know who runs them because if you do, then you can tell them to stop doing that.
Right.
So like will always be a problem for this marketplace. And I think that the police in this case were like pretty smart in realizing that the barrier to entry in this marketplace is so low that like nobody knows who anybody is and there's no real trust here. And it's easy to exploit that to make people much more hesitant to go after these services.
Yeah.
Still, I mean, funniest story I think this week.
Yeah, no, great. That's awesome. I'm glad they did it. This is, I mean, it's hilarious. Like, that's all I got to say.
All right, so next up, we heard a little bit about this last week, I think, but this was ChatGPT was taken down temporarily because there was a data leak. And originally I thought this was just information like on the sidebar about like previous chats, like people being able to see your previous chats, but it seems like it was more than that. It was also payment information potentially as well. So this was, as I said, mildly disruptive to people who have become dependent on this for generating large lists of options or things like that. But they did the most open source thing they could possibly do. They threw a smaller open source project under the bus. So yeah,
that's not funny, but
yeah, some people were joking that the open in OpenAI stands for, blaming open source. But so again, this is just one of those
Mm-hmm.
problems that comes from the ubiquity of these open source libraries being used in these huge projects, and then it turns
Mm-hmm.
out there's one little problem in the way that they implement it, and boom, you have 1.2% of ChatGPT plus subscribers having their payment information potentially leaked. Now, this wasn't
Mm-hmm.
full payment information, it wasn't the full credit card, but it was the subscriber's name, email address, payment address, and the last four of their credit card number. That's enough to buy gas.
Yep.
You know, that's not great. So anyway, that was kind of problematic. It looks as though they managed to fix it relatively quickly. And aside from that, it just kind of calls into question, like, are people really thinking about what they're putting into ChatGPT in terms of, is it sensitive company data? Is it something that if it were scraped on a massive scale would cause them embarrassment or to get fired? I guess we'll see.
Mm-hmm. I hope they remain vigilant.
Yes. Well, I mean, at this point, they're starting, like, there's a lot of, actually, I think one of our stories is Italy is banning ChatGPT in the country, or trying to anyway,
Interesting.
because
Okay.
of this breach caused issues with GDPR potentially. And they're saying
Yeah.
that until they find a way to guarantee people's privacy, that this breach demonstrates that they're not complying with GDPR and the
Mm-hmm.
service won't be available in the country. So that's a pretty big
Interesting.
deal. All right, so we've got some action by the FBI. This is confirming what we were talking about last week, where the current last remaining admin of Breach Forums said that they were shutting it down because they were pretty sure that the FBI had access to the database.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this week, the FBI confirmed they had access to the database, and that was a very good idea to shut it down. So this also, unfortunately, showed the value of perhaps talking to a lawyer, because it looks like Palm immediately confirmed that he was the owner of Breach Forums without a lawyer present to the police. So it seems as though the mystery around this has been resolved.
Right.
You can also see that there's extensive net flow data. Wonder where it was purchased, being used by the FBI to identify Palm here as coming from a IP address that also connected to his iCloud account 97 times. How many times did he connect to the Breach Forums system with this IP address? Once. One time. So it seems like what the FBI is at least leaning on in their affidavit is this one mistake that Palm made connecting to Breach Forums. Every other time he did it perfectly, but this one time that the VPN was either down, misconfigured, or whatever else, he connected and used a IP address that also accessed his local services or his iCloud account. Again, 97 times. So it's not difficult to tie that together. And unfortunately, that destroyed the OPSEC that he was using for this account. It is also kind of noted here that the Breach Forums admin, Batmut, said that everybody is responsible for their own OPSEC. I've been saying this the entire time on the entire forum, and if you trusted anybody else to handle your OPSEC, then you might be in trouble. I never made this assumption as an admin, and nobody else should have either. That's a good point. You play stupid games, you sometimes win stupid prizes. So in this case, it looks like a lot of people are freaking out from that forum who are hoping they didn't make that one mistake, because it seems like the person who was in charge of the whole thing, who was apparently making about $1,000 a day from this Breach Forums account, was unfortunately able to de-anonymize himself with one single mistake. And when I say unfortunately, I mean for him, because he has now been arrested.
This is actually a really interesting story for defenders, right? For people in the InfoSec game like us, because this is the exact thing that we warn people about as defenders. When we build our layered security defense, you have to be right every single time. The attacker, the bad guy, the guy trying to get in, only needs to be right once to get in and wreak havoc. So, the bad guys here, they were going up against the FBI. The FBI got lucky that time, and that's all it took. So,
it only takes $1 billion of net flow data, you guys, to figure out that one time you forgot to use your VPN, because this data is available, it's commercial, and literally our first or second story was about how the FBI was like buying up this data, especially from like a potentially like Tor, like being involved in like Tor. That's that makes it really hard to participate in these sorts of forums anonymously. Like, yes, there are tools out there, and governments complain about how hard they are to get around, but the reality is there's so many resources for the government. It is rarely a fair fight. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next story, which is Oh, this is interesting. So this is a controversial story. I will say that
Okay.
because I believe that there's some back and forth here about how this actually works. So this is something that is being compared to Maltego, and I think
Okay.
that that is an interesting comparison. And some other researchers in this news story also have concluded that that doesn't, maybe it's not actually how it works. So this is what they're claiming to do. This service claims to work for the Russian government and allow them to de-anonymize users by using tiny little mistakes that the user made. So it
Mm-hmm.
claims to be a service that creates tons of data points and scans around and tries to find any time that the user like made a mistake basically and
Mm-hmm.
like leaked public information and then link all that information together in an automated sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sort of thing possible? Yeah,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
technically possible. However, some people are saying that it's much more likely that this is a 0 day or that there's an
Mm-hmm.
insider at Telegram who's able to feed information to this company
Mm-hmm.
to do limited de-anonymization of people who are running Telegram groups. So they're saying that the security behind Telegram like should be good enough to prevent this.
Right.
So and this Hunter tool is what it translates to, is something that probably is not playing completely fair when it comes to the way that it's actually getting its information versus what
Mm-hmm.
it's saying is its process. And to
Right.
be fair, if I was a company selling a 0 day vulnerability to the Russian government for Telegram, I would say it was an open source tool just like Maltego too.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, so kind of an interesting story here where there is some dispute around whether or not this actually is legitimately a tool that works the way it says it does. But it does seem like, it does seem like this is something that could potentially put people who use Telegram and rely on its
Mm-hmm.
security at risk if they're, for example, criticizing the Russian government.
Mm-hmm.
So this comes up a lot now where these 0 day vendors used to have a really great reputation where like, the FBI was buying stuff from them, like,
Mm-hmm.
and like all this other stuff seemed to be going their way. And then all of a sudden their stuff started being proliferated all over so much that like the US government like had people getting attacked by it. Like
Mm-hmm.
other people really started complaining. And now like this sort of commercial spyware is really being tamped down on. And these sorts of
Yeah.
vendors are much more vilified. They need, I mean, not saying that's necessarily what's happening here, but I feel like that industry now requires a type of cover that it didn't need before
Right.
because they've kind of been identified as undesirable actors now by multiple governments, and they need to kind of be like, no, it's open source, just like this other company that everyone's fine
Mm-hmm.
with, in order to kind of explain away these things. Kind of an interesting
Yeah.
like way that these new spyware vendors are positioning themselves.
Yeah. With all the bad press and active campaigns is maybe not the right word, but active pressure to stop funding them, for the governments to stop leveraging them. It's not surprising that they've pivoted their marketing pitch.
Yeah. Yeah. So word is this is a very effective tool, but no one knows why. Interesting. All right, so now we have a story. Let's see, there we go. Oh, emote. All right, so it's not bad enough that it's coming up on tax season. We also have a new variant of Emotet that is trying to blend in with tax
Mm-hmm.
agencies emailing people that they work with fake W-9s. So what do you
Mm-hmm.
need to pull off this attack? Well, a data breach, of which there's plenty,
Sure.
to get information about people who are, working with a particular business to do their taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have that, you can send them a W-9 tax form that requires them to do things that they're not supposed to do. And in this case, it looks like this kind of like brief, like lawyerly or like tax
Uh-huh.
preparer sort of email from purportedly an inspector from the
Mm.
Department of Treasurer from the IRS. That is going to rattle some people if it comes directly to them and it looks like something that they're actually supposed to read. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this 700 kilobytes expands also to like 500 megabytes, which I still think is like a very funny red flag. But of course,
Mm-hmm.
most people aren't going to catch that.
Right.
That's just something that's designed to kind of evade security software, and
Mm-hmm.
again, it is just funny. But when they try to open it, it will pretend to be censored. It's all like, blurry. It's like, oh no,
Right.
all my information's here. I just think it's so funny that they took like a tax document and just like photoshopped like a Gaussian blur
Right.
onto it until you
Mm-hmm.
just can't read it at all. And that's the rub. You see this, you hit view multiple
Yep.
times, it warns you, it tells you
Right.
that it could be malicious, but of course, like they're probably going to run it anyway. And when you do, a bunch of bad things happens as you can very well predict. It'll try
Right.
to steal your information and generally try to take your money faster than
Mm-hmm.
the IRS can. right, so next one we have up. All right, so Twitter was bragging recently about how they were going to open source their algorithm, and it seems like they got some help, and they're not entirely pleased by it. So, I mean, there's not a lot to the story other than somebody leaked a part of the Twitter source code, and it was on GitHub for a little bit. It got taken down, and now Twitter is really going after GitHub in an attempt to force them to give up as much information as possible. They've issued a subpoena, and it looks like GitHub is just like doing their process. They don't really have a comment on it yet. So yeah, nobody knows who leaked it. It was kind of implied that it might have been a Twitter employee who was disgruntled. But if I was leaking Twitter source code and I wanted to implicate someone who has a clear motive, and there's literally like tens of thousands of them, then saying that I'm an ex-Twitter employee would certainly make it difficult to figure out who it was. So if I was someone who just like broke in and just took it, I would blame an ex-Twitter employee too. They all have a motive. It's the perfect person to throw the crime on. So I'm not saying I'm skeptical. It's just like when someone comes out and be like, here's a data breach and I'm this guy, bye. It's just like, was it that guy really? Like there's we can't tell. So it could be anyone. We don't know. But it was implied it was a Twitter employee, and certainly that would be a little bit funny, at least if that was who it ended up being. But the chaos at Twitter continues in that you can now apparently, in some places, still find leaked copies of this source code. All right. Next up, we have. I always say that, of course, there's like two people that are in the news. It's either Patrick Wardle or Matthew Van Hoff. Mac OS Stealer is going after the iCloud keychain. So this is something I actually saw in my inbox because I'm a Patreon supporter of Patrick Wardle earlier. But going through it a little bit more, a really big target on macOS computers is the built-in password manager. This is something that a lot of macOS users don't even like realize is there. This is a pretty low-cost tool that's being sold for like $100. But it claims to be able to go after these and exfiltrate it in like a base 64 format. So if that is the case, then that means that it would be able to collect probably passwords, cookies, credit card details, and all this other stuff from the automated password managers that are built into browsers and macOS itself. And those are juicy targets. Those are like some of the juiciest stuff you can do. And they frequently aren't as locked down as like 1Password or some of these other services that like try to really like make it less convenient, more secure, as opposed to operating systems where like you might not even know that this exists, like if you've never used it. So yeah, just be careful. Here we go. Here's my other entry for most confusing graph of the week. It's both barely legible because it's so small and there's so many connections. I don't know which way it flows. Are we going up and down? Are we going left to right? I don't know. But this is the way apparently the $100 malicious macOS stealer works. It seems like there's like a Telegram message that goes out that uses like emojis. I don't know if this is like an actual example or not. But big ups to Upticks. I really hope that I'm pronouncing that right, for producing this absolutely vexing image for this news story. Love it. Love working in InfoSec. Just explaining this is its own job. Okay, so that's pretty much it. It's just an interesting reminder that we use these transparent password managers all the time, and they're now baked into the operating system. So $100 tool that can potentially go after that on macOS is a pretty big deal. All right, we also have a very brief and boring, well, sorry, it's not boring. We have a very brief story on Apple fixing a already disclosed WebKit 0-day. This is on older devices. So what does that mean? What does it mean when a vendor goes back and fixes devices they no longer support? It means it's a 0-day that's being exploited in the wild and at scale. So if I had to guess what that means, it means some vendor in a country with a lot of old iPhones has rolled out a very cheap like spyware product, and they're just tired of it. That is why we see a lot of these like older devices get dragged back into updates, because somebody ends up getting this exploit that's 4 or 5 years old that trickles down, and eventually, it's useful in a place where there's a bunch of old devices, and it becomes so prolific or becomes involved in some legal battle or court case that they're just, we have to fix this. So they are restricting the technical details of this particular attack, I believe, just to make it so that as many people can fix this as possible. But they're saying that you should absolutely, fix this as soon as possible, because it is being exploited at scale with 0-day. Again, so probably some spyware vendor that has found a way to very cheaply and at scale do like a how to track your girlfriend or domestic partner
Right.
tracker that's like out there being sold. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the ones you really want to patch, because if it can be bought for $25 on a subscription by anybody with a credit card, it's really, really becoming like a societal problem.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so next up, a little bit of a depressing one. We'll breeze through this. So Latitude Financial, we have a handful of Australian stories today about data breaches. And as far as I remember, like these just keep rolling on and on and
Mm-hmm.
on. Like, I understand you guys are not part of the European Union. I'm from the United States. It's confusing sometimes because of the accent. But like, is this like, is anyone gonna get punished for this? Like, are you guys just getting free credit monitoring? Like, it seems wild to me that
Mm-hmm.
that with the amount of breaches, this is like 14 million. They're like, oopsie, like we lost 300,000 people's information. This is 14 million driver's licenses. How many Australians are there? So this is driver's licenses. There's also a substantial amount of passport information. This is a really bad breach, and it
Yeah.
involves identity documents for people applying for loans and stuff like that. This is really some of the worst stuff you could breach, because it's a recipe for financial disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Like once this stuff goes up, like it could really impact a lot of people. So truly unfortunate that this breach has expanded to include so many people. 14 million is a ton of
Mm-hmm.
identity documents to have been breached. Like these are the things
Yeah.
that a society uses to identify themselves, like to log into government stuff. Like,
Right.
you know, having your, like in the United States anyway, your social security number, all your government document IDs, scans of it
Mm-hmm.
potentially breached. Like that's a worst nightmare style scenario, because like you don't have much other than your face and maybe your fingerprints to
Right.
prove who you are. Maybe your DNA, like I don't know. So we're getting like pretty low on ways to prove that you are who you say you are to like
Right.
important services, without physically going in and submitting to some sort of biometric
Right.
scan.
I mean, you think about it, the United States example is, and I don't know if Kody, you've done this, but like the real IDs, I don't think they're enforced yet, but you have to bring in your passport, you know, a couple of these documents that this is the same information. If you have this, you can potentially forge it. And I'm not going to say anything bad about the people at the DMV, but like they're not forgery experts. You know what I mean? They're going to get the document, they're going to scan the thing, like it looks legit. You know, this is scary stuff.
No, absolutely. Like it, with the data breaches that are being tied together and so much contextual data available now for
Mm-hmm.
scammers, like, and now with AI tools coming out that can potentially stitch all this together, like it
Mm-hmm.
really, it's pretty shocking thinking about how specific the phishing emails can get and how there's no excuse for attackers
Mm-hmm.
to have misspellings anymore.
Right. Or think about this, like, hey, they're going to call, you know, your bank or whatever, go through the phone tree. They always ask some basic questions like, what's the last four of your social, or some other information that could easily be mined from any of these breaches. Think about that. Then what can they do? Anything they want.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to, you know, unlock your credit card to buy whatever it is, or, you know, maybe initiate a transfer or something over the phone.
Yeah. Yeah, and with the AI voice changing that I've seen as well, like it's
Mm-hmm.
actually getting pretty good. I've been watching a lot of TikTok videos of like the presidents like playing like Minecraft, and like the voices are like really good, and it's entertaining
Mm-hmm.
because they nail the voices so well. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you can use it for stupid stuff like AI, like animation, like you can definitely, you know, use it for like spoofing someone's bank account or doing a SIM swapping attack.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
All right, so now we get to our Ghost in the Shell lead-in. This is Microsoft bringing GPT-4 powered security copilot to incident response. So the intention here is that people who know what they're asking for can trigger actions and get information to better contextualize what they're doing during like a ransomware attack or like some
Mm-hmm.
other security incident where minutes matter and they have to be able to like tell it to shut down all the ports or these servers or whatever else, and
Right.
not have someone running around and like doing it, or like a bunch of people all typing like really quickly. While it's not as cool as having, you know, a bunch of like androids whose like fingers like split off into
Right.
tinier fingers so they can type faster, it is unfortunately more practical, at least at this
Mm-hmm.
moment. So I think right now it's a very understated series of features. It doesn't seem like they're kind of like trying to like imply that it's going in this direction, but like you would not believe how low key this announcement is. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like he's so he's just thrilled about it. So I'm thinking of like, you know, AIs fighting each other, and like he's just
Mm-hmm.
having a great time. So I think that like what I'm imagining this is like maybe a little bit more hardcore than any of these friendly people are talking about. I think that this might be, you know, pretty basic at this time, but it is a really interesting thing to think that you could be, you know, shouting at an AI and having it
Right.
actually like listening to you and not actually just be acting out a sci-fi movie or like Star Trek.
Right. this is not pertinent to the discussion, but Kody, you're halfway there. It looks like, if you really mean business, you have to wear like a business casual zip up sweater.
Oh, I got this one from the Electronic Frontier Foundation in exchange for a $100 donation. And I told that guy, if you give me a t-shirt along with it, I will wear the sweatshirt on every stream I do for the next year. And look at that, EFF. Look at it. I'm doing it. I told you, guy, at the conference in New York, Hope Conference. All right. But yes, I've dressed for success with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. These are very nice hoodies. What I didn't know is actually the tech activism law on the shoulder is glow in the dark. So like sometimes the lights will go out and I'll catch myself glowing, and I didn't know it was there. It's really cool.
That's pretty cool.
All right, so that's all I have to say about this AI powered security copilot. I think it could be a cool Ghost in the Shell like thing, but right now it seems highly specialized towards responders. But obviously, if you just add in like a voice to text like back and forth, you created the computer from Star Trek, but for like security incidents, and that's kind of cool, honestly.
That is.
All right. So we have another victim of the Go Anywhere breach. This is the Clop ransomware gang. Again, we've talked about them for like 3 weeks in a row with increasingly large brands being involved. And guess where this one is located? The land of 14 million other recipients of free credit monitoring, Australia. So this is a Blackstone-owned company. It is apparently Australia's largest gambling and entertainment company, and it is the exact same like kind of downstream problem that we've seen all these other businesses encounter. So it's unknown what type of data was grabbed by the Clop ransomware gang. All they've said is that they have a limited number of files, which again, like being on the receiving end of so much like disaster response vocabulary, unexpected, and I need like an like disaster response vocabulary bingo card where we have like unexpected encryption event and then like a limited number of files, that sort of thing. Because what's in the file? It could be nuclear codes, we don't know, or it could be just like receipts for office supplies, like nobody knows. So obviously, this is the same method of exploitation we've seen before. They're going to threat to leak the files, and they have to determine how much that's worth to them, or how much it's, how much free credit monitoring they can afford to provide. But there is some sample data here, so it gives us a little bit of a leak like window into what's going on, like coming soon, apparently. As these sorts of negotiations tend to go to, if they refuse to pay up front, the ransomware gang will start to publish like small amounts of information to say, yes, in fact, we do have this data and this is how bad it is. And it kind of ratchets up the pressure on the companies who are dealing with the problem. Now, I imagine that the creator of the Go Anywhere software that is the center of this, Forta, is facing the prospect of a class action lawsuit because like everybody's involved in this. We keep naming company after company. Obviously, the details on this are still kind of coming out as to who is involved in this and what the final fallout is going to be. But based on the number of companies that are involved, like you can expect that if any of them pay the ransom, they're going to have a big incentive to try to recoup that money somehow.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
All right, so let's get into Wi-Fi stuff. I mentioned Matthew Van Hoff was in the news again. This is kind of a tricky attack, so I'm glad that I get to report on it, because just reading it would confuse me if I was a novice. So cybersecurity researchers, aka my friend Matthew, discovered a fundamental security flaw in the design of the Wi-Fi protocol standard. That's a big deal. And this allows attackers to trick access points into leaking network frames in a plain text form. I believe you can also inject frames in a plain text form. So this is something that has to do with all these tricky little rules that Wi-Fi has to do in order to provide good service. Matthew loves these attacks, and he's focused on things like making it so like networks are told that the power they're allowed to use is the absolute minimum. So like both client and access point like turn on their power all the way and create a denial of service attack just by like using that one information element that says what power to use abusively. So Matthew loves kind of attacking Wi-Fi in this way. And what he was able to determine was that there is a power saving feature that allows a device like my phone, perhaps, or any other client to go into a shutdown power saving mode and have all the network packets that are sent to it be queued for a while. Now, that's cool. That's fine. However, there is no real protection built into this queuing process. And that's where things start to get fun and interesting. So what's going on here? I have a device like my pixel or whatever, it's gone into a sleep mode, or I, as the attacker, have sent a packet that has the sleep flag on it that says, all right, everything going to this destination, I want you to queue until you get the wake up signal. So I then, as the attacker, could actually send packets that are not encrypted. I could send plain text packets, or I could connect to the router and send packets with my own security key and put it in this queue. And when I send the magic wake back up packet, the router takes all those packets, encrypts them with the correct key, and sends them to the victim. So that's interesting. That means that we, as the attacker, can actually inject things into what the victim is receiving in a way that we shouldn't be able to, because typically Wi-Fi negotiates its own secret key with each person, and I would need to somehow break that key or capture that key in order to inject traffic. But this is actually taking advantage of a flaw that means that we can take that queuing feature and change the security context. So we can send packets to that queue that are not properly encrypted or even plain text, and have them delivered to the user with the proper security signing, which is done by the router anyway, which is a pretty big deal and pretty crazy, that it can both leak information and potentially inject like plain text JavaScript if you're loading any like plain HTML websites. So there's some leaks here. There's some other like really interesting stuff with this research, but that's kind of the high level. This would be a contender for my most confusing graph of the week if I didn't understand it.
Right.
It kind of makes me sad that I actually do, because it means I'm like a big Wi-Fi nerd at this point. But yeah, so this is explaining how when you set this power saving mode, you can send an authentication request to the router and change the security context. You can then send a bunch of stuff that you're not supposed to, send it a wake up, and then it will dequeue without the queue and potentially also leak files or frames rather from what the original person was doing. So this is both like an in and an out kind of attack, where I can like leak information that they were potentially loading, or that was for traffic that was for them, or I could potentially inject things into that person's traffic flow. So that's like Wi-Fi is leaky is basically what it means. And you can trick the router into obeying this with a pretty simple technique. It's called MAC stealer. So what is affected? A lot of these test bases were found to be vulnerable. I believe that the filled in circle means vulnerable, and the dash or the line means either not tested or the open. You know, a key would have been nice here. But a lot of vendors are acknowledging the flaw. Cisco acknowledged it, but minimized it, and their response has been, this attack is seen as an opportunistic attack. The information gained by the attacker would be of minimal value in a securely configured network. What does that mean, Cisco? This is going on my vendor bingo, or my incident response bingo. This attack wouldn't work in a properly secured network. So like if you follow the letter of everything they recommend, then this wouldn't work.
Sure.
Like, because there's other security features they've layered that can protect against this. But the implication is that if you deviate in any way, you are officially out of warranty when it comes to this statement. So this is, I would say, still a valid Wi-Fi attack, and one that should be studied more, because it is a very easy one to do and has some pretty serious implications depending on the way that you implement it. So as a Wi-Fi hacking nerd, I think this is super cool. I'm sure that Matthew will go into more detail on this. If you just Google his name, Matthew Van Hoff, he releases all of his papers in like PDF format for free, and you can go through them. They're actually pretty easy to read if you pick a good one. So that's probably my favorite story of the week, actually, is I really think that that's cool, because Wi-Fi tends to affect billions of devices, and this is one that affects a lot of people. All right, so we're technically out of time, but you know what? We've just got a couple more stories we can go through quickly. A Trojanized version of Tor, the Tor browser, is targeting Russians. I wonder why. Probably because they're trying to get around internet restrictions, and they're the perfect target. So that's pretty much the story here. It's that Russians are disproportionately more likely to use the Tor network, especially people that are tech savvy. And that means they probably have crypto, which is exactly what this is trying to steal. So this is just a malicious Tor browser from probably, you know, like a phishing website or something else that manipulates search results for like the Russian version of Tor and makes it so it pops to the top of people's search results. All right, going through quickly. This is I always love to report cryptocurrency like security incidents, because I barely understand them. Another smart contract is manipulated, and tons were tricked by a flaw in a smart contract. So most of the vulnerabilities that are found in these cryptocurrency exchanges are problems with the contract that allow someone to do an illegal action, or something that is, you know, technically legal but is only advantageous to one person. And that is exactly what happened to SafeMoon, which was a giant pool of assets, which apparently allowed actors to inflate the price of what they had and then sell it at a very high price and walk away. So they are still investigating the incident. The statement from the company was actually very concise and there's nothing for me to add to the bingo, so I have to give them credit for that. But if you're interested in cryptocurrency exploits as much as I am not, this is the actual public burn. What that means, you can tell me. But the fundamental is someone was able to find a flaw in the logic of the contract, maybe with ChatGPT. That's actually something a lot of people are using it for, which I think is really funny because it's actually kind of good at business logic. But yeah, so this is something that someone found and was able to manipulate, just going to show that you really can't make mistakes anymore when it comes to these sorts of logical flaws. All right, so this is funny. Killian, did you know that you could just straight up change Bing results a couple days ago?
I did not know.
All right, so we don't have much time to go over the technical side of this, but it turns out there was a flaw in the way that some of these apps that Azure was running that allowed you to like log in anonymously, effectively, and start to change results. So they, some researchers found a flaw in like Azure App Services application that lets anybody log in, and this is for legitimate uses for like Azure like owners that are trying to set organizational boundaries and like prevent things from like bleeding over. But the problem was, for some reason, they were able to log into Bing Trivia. It allowed anybody to log in to its CMS system and then like change results, which actually mirrored live on the Bing website. So after like attempting to like verify this, they were able to change the results for best soundtracks from Dune in 2021 to Hackers in 1995.
That seems legit, though, to be honest.
I think they improved it, honestly. So by, you know, maybe injecting their opinion into the search results, they were able to prove that this sort of thing could actually impact what users were seeing in real time. So they contacted Microsoft. This has been resolved. But again, a very funny one of those like kind of like cloud permission settings thing that ended up allowing a potential attacker to change what people see when they run a Bing search.
It just goes to show, I mean, the more we leverage cloud, the more interconnected it all is that we don't even realize behind the scenes. You think you're interacting with one thing, but again, data is stored in multiple places. The APIs connect all the things together. So there's tons of downstream attacks.
Yep. Somebody in the chat is asking, what is the name of Matthew? What is the spelling of Matthew Van Hoff's name? Dropped in the chat. Matthew, MATHY, VANHOEF. My favorite Wi-Fi security researcher by far. We've also had him on the Hack 5 channel before, like explaining some of these things. So I know he's very busy, but maybe he'd be down to come by and explain some of this stuff to us sometime, because I really enjoy a lot of the stuff that he finds. All right, so our final story is the CISA is done with like commercial spyware vendors that are using these old exploits. At this point, they are ordering federal agencies to patch the security vulnerabilities that are known to be zero-day exploits that are used by commercial spyware. So they've released a list of these, and if you have these running on a government system now, you are going to be ordered to fix it, because at this point it means you are a legitimate target for pretty low cost commercial spyware that has trickled down and made its way into the hands of a lot of adversaries of potentially the United States government. So that means that we can no longer afford to have those vulnerabilities out there, because it just means anybody could pay a certain amount of money to breach these systems.
It seems like table stakes, really.
Yeah, it's really just like at a certain point you can't afford anymore to have like a dollar price tag sitting on a federal agency and know about it for this long, and then be like, oh no, like the dairy industry got hacked through this like problem with the FDA. Oh no, like we know about it. We know that this is a problem already. We know how much the exploit costs. We know that one of our adversaries could buy it for that price. It's a very short step to assume that perhaps we should order them to fix it.
I'm glad they did, but yeah, it's, you know.
All right, so that's all the time we have for security news this week. If you feel like we missed anything, please go to the Security Forward channel and leave it as a comment. I will answer your questions or address it when we do our live Wednesday stream, which, by the way, thank you to everyone. I had to cancel the stream, but everybody was very nice about it. I managed to do a great class as a result of it, but I would have been streaming to you in a public library, and the sheer stress and just how many children were screaming, really made it so I think that we made the right choice there. So we will be live again on Wednesday. And also, if you want to check out some great Verona's resources, as they are the sponsor of this show and responsible for bringing it to you every week, make sure to check out the Verona's website. And you can also go to veronas.com/Kody, Kody, to see the events we're running this week. There's a lot of great stuff coming up, including RSA. Killian, are you going to RSA?
I am. Tickets booked and everything. I'm all in.
Tickets booked. Oh, okay. I got to go do something. But yes, I'm going to be at RSA. I'm going to be doing, I believe, my Wi-Fi hacking demo that I did a couple years ago that was super popular. So you can come by the Verona's booth at the RSA conference and learn to hack Wi-Fi, compete for a prize, and maybe even try out one of our fun prototype games we're going to be experimenting with. So lots of cool stuff we're going to be doing there. Hopefully we'll see you at RSA, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Take care.